Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. And on this episode, I'm talking about the necessary and proper clause, primarily focusing not necessarily on the entire clause and the legal doctrine behind it, but just on the word necessary and the meaning of the word necessary, which at the time of ratification meant, well, necessary. But I want to talk a little bit about how people like Alexander Hamilton and Chief Justice John Marshall changed the legal meaning of the term to what we have today, where necessary no longer means necessary. Instead, it just means convenient or useful to those who hold power. First of all, before getting to that, a quick hello and a huge thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one, I can't thank you enough. Every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I think you'll find this to be an interesting educational episode. I've done a lot of them on the necessary and proper clause, and I don't think we can cover it enough. And I'm going to get to it all in just a moment here, but I want to take a quick moment and say hello to everyone out in the live chat while we allow people another minute or so to get notifications. I'm seeing people pointing out how YouTube, for example, is really slow at doing this. They are not awesome. I guess it's an overload. I don't know the technology issues. But anyways, hello to Brian in Georgia, Missouri Liberty Report, Kirk Morrison in Camden, South Carolina. Hope you're going to be safe from the storms down there. Tom Norman in Ohio, Wren, Ohio, Clay Kent, Jesse Newman, Outlaw. Good morning from Hurricane Ian. Yeah, no kidding. It's dangerous. I hope everyone's doing well. Tim Martin in Arizona, Senator DT in Elkhart, Lisa Believe, Tyler B, Cowboy Roy Rogers, Happy Snowfish, Stephen Potts, Bonehead, Legalese says it means incidental. Right, not implied. It means incidental. Bonehead, well, necessary and proper is based on the legal doctrine of principles and incidents. I'll reference another episode during this show that you can check out and learn a little bit more about this for those of you who want to actually get the detailed legal meaning behind it. There's Debbie, there's Jay Armstrong, and Haji. I appreciate you guys all being here, but without any further ado, let's get right to this. I want to just get a quick introduction to the necessary and proper clause. And if you want to follow along with the original source documents, other articles and episodes that I'm going to be mentioning, you have to follow us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. There, for each episode, I publish a blog post 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done, and you're going to find a whole section with show links, all the source documents and stuff, so you can read and learn more in context on your own time. I'm just scratching the surface today. Here, we have a resource page where you can learn about the necessary and proper clause. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. The necessary and proper clause is often called the elastic or sweeping clause because many people believe it gives the federal government the power to do just about anything. And in many ways, that's how they use it today because the people have allowed that to happen or in many cases begged for it to happen. However, the necessary and proper clause doesn't actually delegate any power at all. It is what is known as a recital. As constitutional scholar and longtime friend of the TAC, Rob Nadelson, put it, quote, a recital is a passage in a legal document that has no substantive legal effect, but serves to inform the reader of assumptions or facts behind the document. Another example of a recital in the Constitution is the preamble. Here's the full text of it. Congress shall have power, quote, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. During the Virginia Ratifying Convention, back to our resource page, George Nicholas, this is one of many examples of this, assured the delegates that the necessary and proper clause only enabled Congress to carry into execution the powers delegated to it in the first place. It wasn't a grant of new power. It was something, we saw this from the Federalist side. Basically, they were saying, look, whether we had this clause there or not, this is how you read the legal document. You could have added this exact same phrase at the end of every single clause in Article 1, Section 8. It would have the exact same meaning as putting it at the end. They did it for, well, clarity's sake, I guess. He says, here's Nicholas. Suppose it had been inserted at the end of every power, that they should have the power to make laws to carry that power into execution. Would this have increased their powers? If therefore it could not have increased their powers if placed at the end of each power, it cannot increase them at the end of all. This clause only enables them to carry into execution the powers given them, but gives them no additional power. And this was the Federalist argument over and over. Of course, anti-Federalists warned it would be abused, even where you could find areas where they were saying, okay, Mr. Wilson or Mr. Nicholas or whoever, we understand what you're saying is the legal meaning of this, but we don't trust human nature, and we know this is going to be expanded. And I think that kind of a warning absolutely played out. Here's Alexander Hamilton, of all people, who sounds better on this clause than almost anyone alive in government today. In Federalist number 33, he made a very similar assertion as to what George Nicholas made in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, writing that the necessary and proper clause, along with the supremacy clause, merely stated a known truism and delegated no additional power to the federal government. Here's how Hamilton put it. It may be affirmed with perfect confidence that the constitutional operation of the intended government would be precisely the same if these clauses were entirely obliterated. You don't even need them. They were basically superfluous, as if they were repeated in every article, like Nicholas was saying. I think this was written well before Nicholas's speech in Virginia. Anyways, Hamilton continues. He says, they are only declaratory of a truth, which would have resulted by necessary and unavoidable implication from the very act of constituting a federal government and vesting it with certain specified powers. Now, I'm not going to get into the full details, like I was saying right at the beginning, of the legal doctrine of principles and incidents. There's a principal power and incidental power, not implied power. You can search all through it. There is no such thing as implied power, even though people like Hamilton said there wouldn't be implied power during the ratification debates. And then all of a sudden, when we get to the bank bill, which I'll cover in a moment, the First National Bank, all of a sudden there's all kinds of implied powers. But I did an episode covering that legal doctrine in more details, the overall meaning of the full clause, rather than what I'm going to get into here, just the meaning of the word necessary. Necessary and proper, not anything and everything. Of course, that will be linked to in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I've done a ton of episodes on necessary and proper. Anyways, here from an article by T.J. Martinell. He asks the essential question: what constitutes necessary? And he says the question may seem semantic, but Randy E. Barnett, who's done some of the best originalist work on the Constitution, we love him on a lot of stuff. We don't agree with him on everything, but I think that's the way we are with basically every scholar. But we can learn a great deal, and his research methods are absolutely phenomenal. The question may seem semantic, but Randy E. Barnett writes in his paper, The Original Meaning of the Necessary and Proper Clause, that the definition of the term was not only debated in the early years of the Republic, but it had enormous implications for congressional power and how to interpret other parts of the Constitution. And again, TJ continues. He says the first and best place to start, and this is the first and best place to start, with understanding any part of the Constitution, any word, any phrase, any clause, any section of the Constitution. You want to start with, of course, the Philadelphia Convention and the state ratifying conventions. And in many ways, the state ratifying conventions are far more important. I know a lot of people thought original meant the intention of the people who drafted the document, but a lot of those proceedings were kept secret for quite some time, and so they actually had no impact on the people who gave the document legal force. So like any legal document, the legal meaning of it today means the same as it meant to the people who and how they understood it when it gave it legal force, and that's the state ratifying conventions. We really have to understand how they understood things, and that's why the arguments about how it was going to work to those people, like by people like George Nicholas in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, or by Hamilton in Federalist number 33, which has been given. The Federalist Papers were important for ratification, understanding the legal meaning of the Constitution, primarily during ratification debates in New York State. And that's why they all start out with the people of New York. We give them an outsized influence today, even though they weren't widely read during the ratification debates in other states. They did not have a lot of influence, like James Wilson's State House Yard speech. But anyways, so TJ's right. The best place to start is Philadelphia Convention, as well as the state ratifying conventions. Most significant about its addition to the Constitution wasn't what was said about it in Philadelphia, but what was not said. Randy Barnett writes that the clause was added, quote, without any previous discussion by the convention, nor was it the subject of any debate from its initial proposal to the convention's final adoption of the Constitution. So it wasn't It was widely understood to mean what it means. This alone, TJ points out, suggests that its meaning wasn't up for debate or dispute among the framers, a claim that is further substantiated during state ratifying conventions by how Federalists insisted that the necessary and proper clause was not an additional freestanding grant of power, but merely made explicit what was already implicit in the grant of each enumerated power. So if you delegate someone the power to, let's say you run a grocery store and you hire a manager to run the grocery store. Well, you don't have to spell out, yeah, you can go out there and buy mops to actually sweep the floor and hire people to do the sweeping, or buy shelving units to fill the store. You just have an empty space. You hire someone, you want to start a store. You don't have to list out all those things expressly. These are the necessary and proper means of carrying that job into execution. So anytime you delegate power to an agent to do a job for you, these are things that are supposed to be clear legally, but not really. Anyways, here's James Madison in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 15, 1788. He said, with respect to the supposed operation of what was denominated the sweeping clause, the gentleman, he said, was mistaken, for it only extended to the enumerated powers. Should Congress attempt to extend it to any power not enumerated, it would not be warranted by the clause. Now, I did another episode on necessary and proper just about James Madison's views. James Madison on the necessary and proper clause. I will link to that in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. So it was understood over and over and over that necessary meant necessary, but soon after ratification, well, here back to TJ, he says, the clause merely clarified that Congress had the authority to engage in actions necessary. We know what that word means, to fulfill its duties or exercise its expressly delegated authority. We see all kinds of agencies today taking something that was passed decades ago sometimes, and then all of a sudden they're redefining what something means to give them more power. And this has always happened. This happened from the earliest days of the Republic. And Legalese, who's out there in the live chat on YouTube, has great articles talking about the taxing power. We just published another one, I think just this morning, about how they expanded the taxing power, and then instead of just being a way to raise money, all of a sudden it's used as a way to prohibit or to discourage activities. And they've expanded power by expanding definitions for ages. Anyways, back to TJ's article. However, Barnett writes that soon after the Constitution was ratified and enacted, ambiguity suddenly crept in as to the meaning of necessary. All of a sudden, we're not sure exactly what it means. We have to discuss this, and maybe it means something different, particularly during the creation of the bank under President George Washington's administration. Here's James Madison in his speech against the bank bill. This is February 2nd, 1791. He said the proposed bank could not even be called necessary to the government. At most, it could be but convenient. So to James Madison, the term necessary and the term convenient were not the same word. You don't use them interchangeably. No one uses things like that interchangeably in their own lives. Oh, hey, it's necessary for us to get the groceries today, or we're not going to eat tonight. That doesn't mean, well, it would just be nice to get groceries today. I don't know if my analogies are awesome today or if they're just dumb, but hopefully that one's pretty obvious. And Madison is clearly saying that the word necessary does not mean the word convenient. It's something different. Whatever it may mean, even if it doesn't mean necessary, what the word is on its face, it does not mean convenient. Absolutely not. Here's Thomas Jefferson, almost 2 weeks later, February 15th, 1791, also arguing against that bank bill of 1791, Hamilton's brainchild, which gave us, well, that's another episode. Here's how Jefferson put it. The Constitution allows only the means which are necessary. And I'm not sure if that's in italics in the original, but I think it probably is the way that Avalon has it in italics. So he's really emphasizing that necessary means necessary. Let me just read Jefferson's words again. The Constitution allows only the means which are necessary, not those which are merely convenient for effecting the enumerated powers. There is not one, I'll just go read the whole thing because this is good. If such a latitude of construction be allowed to this phrase as to give any non-enumerated power, it will go to everyone. So he's saying if you're just turning it into convenient and for non-enumerated powers, they basically have unlimited power at that point. It's just whether or not they're going to use it that way. And that's what they established in the here and in the years to come. Anyways, for there is not one which ingenuity may not torture into a convenience in some instance or other to someone of so long a list of enumerated powers. So we shouldn't be surprised that people with power, if they're allowed to use the word necessary as the word convenient, or use the word convenient and substitute for the meaning of the word necessary, then we shouldn't be surprised that they're going to torture into convenience basically anything they want. And that's what they've done for well over a century. It would swallow up all the delegated powers and reduce the whole to one power. What would be the point of having a list of enumerated powers if they can just do whatever is convenient? Whatever they want, really. As before observed, therefore it was that the Constitution restrained them to the necessary means. That is to say, to those means without which the grant of power would be nugatory. So in other words, if you can't do it without that, so like if you hire a manager to run your store and he can't hire any staff to actually run the company, then that would destroy the power delegated to that guy. So again, I'm not sure if that's the best example, but I think it makes sense. Now, in response, Hamilton argued necessary meant convenient or useful. His opinion on the constitutionality of an act to establish a bank, he was the last word on this one, February 23rd, 1791. You can Command F or Control F or whatever version you use on whatever platform or machine you use. I will link to this in the show notes. But I believe he used the word convenient or convenience 10 times. So he just kept talking about the convenience of having this bank to do stuff that was delegated to the government. And that's how they started to twist it. And of course, unfortunately, President Washington signed that thing into law. Now here's Hamilton again. Necessary often means no more than needful, requisite, incidental, useful, or conducive to. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I say, oh, hey, it's necessary we get this done on Tuesday, it doesn't mean, hey, if you think you can, maybe. It's necessary. Necessary means necessary. It is a common mode here, Hamilton, man, that guy. It is a common mode of expression to say that it is necessary for a government or a person to do. He's not just talking about government. He's just saying this is how people use the word. And I know we're supposed to study common usage of terms in the time of 18th century. I haven't found anything, and I've read through Barnett's research on this and others. I haven't found anyone giving an example of people really using the term necessary to mean convenient or useful or helpful or a good idea. It is a common mode of expression, Hamilton says, that it is necessary for a government or a person to do this or that thing when nothing more is intended or understood than that the interests of the government or person require or will be promoted by the doing of this or that thing. So he's saying necessary means necessary by saying it requires that action, but he's also at the same time saying, well, it'll just help you do stuff. It'll make it better. So again, convenient or useful. The U.S. Supreme Court, T.J. Martinell writes, would later take up the debate over the meaning necessary. And I have not studied this case at all. Maybe Legalese wants to do an article on this. Hint, if you're still out there. The 1805 case of U.S. versus Fisher. I don't know if there's a great article or a blog post in that, but if you think there's something about that we could learn from, I'd love to hear your take on it. Where Chief Justice John Marshall gave, quote, almost complete discretion to Congress, according to Randy Barnett. TJ goes on, he says, Marshall would offer another interpretation years later in McCullough versus Maryland. I think we've all heard about this one, 1819, where Barnett writes that the Chief Justice, quote, adopted in some places almost word for word the opinion Hamilton used issued as Secretary of the Treasury. So Hamilton's view was different during ratification. It changed in 1791, and then once it got to the Chief Justice John Marshall, and sometimes we hammer on Marshall where we shouldn't, but on this one, certainly he's just adopting Hamilton's view of what necessary is, and sometimes word for word, according to Randy Barnett. Barnett notes that, quote, and here's the big takeaway on this section, unlike Madison's bank speech, Marshall's opinion is a central part of every casebook on constitutional law. So everyone who's learning about the Constitution, the lawyers, the legal system, the people who are supposedly supposed to get it right, most of them probably have never heard what the father of the Constitution had to say about the meaning of the word necessary. Never. But of course, they hear all about what Hamilton and Marshall, so it's very skewed. They don't have a holistic understanding of what the debate was about. They just think this is it, and that's the end of the story. And so that brings me to the latest article published by T.J. Martinell. Again, he's done a lot of writing, some overviews of great papers on the necessary and proper clause. He says one of the most famous and important Supreme Court opinions is from the 1819 case. That's McCullough versus Maryland. It set the stage for massive expansion of federal power by incorrectly defining the constitutional meaning of the word necessary. Here's how he describes it. The verbal debates in that case, it pitted two very different definitions of necessary. A broad one touted by Hamilton, who was gone at that point, and a very narrow one advocated by Jefferson and the state of Maryland. Hamilton claimed that the word meant convenient or useful. And here TJ cites the quote that I gave you from Hamilton's opinion, that it's a common mode to actually just use the word necessary as meaning useful or something that people want to do. During the verbal arguments, Daniel Webster took a similar stance. What a surprise, arguing that necessary meant Congress could do things that are, quote, suitable and fitted to the object, and best and most useful in relation to the end proposed. So just as long as it's useful, it suddenly means it's necessary to be done. Meanwhile, Jefferson believed that necessary was tantamount to indispensable. He says here, and I would have to look at this debate a little bit further. He says that Madison took kind of an in-between view on that at that point. And I wish I had the right section here of the case. Let's see if I can pull this up. I'm looking for John Marshall. Here's John Marshall's opinion. And I'm just highlighting a small piece of this, but of course I will link to it in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And here he is basically taking Hamilton's view and saying this is going to be the end of the story. He said, we find talking about the word necessary, what it means, we find that it frequently imports no more than that one thing is convenient or useful or essential to another. I think the word essential makes sense. That's a good synonym for this. Essential. You can't do it without it. That's why it's necessary. But convenient is a totally different term. To employ the means necessary, Marshall writes, to an end is generally understood as employing any means calculated to produce the end, and not as being confined to those single means without which the end would be entirely unattainable. Now, Madison criticized Marshall's view on this. He criticized it pretty heavily. For example, in a letter to Spencer Roane, I'm not sure if I have it out here. I don't have it handy. Let me see if I can pull it up here on my iPad, because this is actually a pretty good quote. Madison to Spencer Roane. No, but I will add a link to it in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty, and see if I can actually include that as well, because Madison's take on that is pretty solid. Anyways, here back to T.J. Martinell. He said there are a few obvious lessons to this. One, and this is really important to understand, no matter what statements are made or promises offered when new government powers are proposed, once it's settled and down, it's another story. That's the way it is with government. That's the way it always was. Ingenious men will find ingenious reasons to come up with opposite constructions of the same clause. That's how John Williams put it in the New York Ratifying Convention, where he was mostly battling with people like Alexander Hamilton. So we shouldn't be surprised that no matter what they tell us, once those people have power, eventually there's going to be some people in there that are going to take that power and define it differently. Or sometimes it's going to be the exact same people if we take someone like Alexander Hamilton, who's going to flip and do a completely different version of it, or maybe even John Marshall. But TJ continues, he says, but the most important is that a government will not limit itself in its interpretation of its constitution. It just doesn't. So the Supreme Court failed to do that starting early on. It is only with the states and the people, respectively, where the feds can be held in check. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. This is so essential, this kind of foundational understanding of how things are supposed to be as our starting point. Then, of course, the question is, well, how do you deal with it? We actually try to get that kind of message out to more and more people. What the Constitution is supposed to really mean, how to defend it when the government refuses to do so, which is constantly, and that's the work that we do here primarily. Nothing helps us get that job done. Roll up our sleeves every single day and do that kind of work to reach and teach more people, more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Don't feel obligated to join us, but if you do have a couple of dollars of that government fiat, throw it our way. We will take every penny and use it against them. Tom Woods, my great friend, once said in an interview, he said, there's no one in the world who has done more to advance the venerable Jeffersonian tradition of nullification more than us here at the TAC, and we will continue to do that. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Let me take a look over in the chat and see if I can answer any questions or comments and get back to. But I should also mention again, if you want to follow along with the show notes, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. I'm not seeing any questions that I can get to right now, but I will scroll through there and look in a little bit more detail later on today or tomorrow. I get a lot of feedback and ideas for future episodes, so please do continue leaving comments, whether it's live or in the archive. That does trigger the algorithms as well, and it tells those platforms to show us to more people. It helps out a great deal. So do reviews on Apple Podcasts, just merely smashing the like button, sharing, all that stuff really helps us reach more people. Thank you so much for your help. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it made you think. I hope you learned something. That's more important than anything. I should mention that I'm actually, for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been having a little trouble in my neighborhood here with day-to-day life. And after many, many years, we're actually leaving Los Angeles. And over the next couple of weeks, we're moving. So I'm going to have to be off at least a couple of days for movers. I'll give you guys an update on that probably early next week or maybe on Friday to let you know what the schedule is going to be. But I'm planning that out and really busted my butt to get set up into a new, nicer, safer, cleaner, healthier location. Not too far away for those of you who are wondering, but still much, much better. Anyway, so I really appreciate you being here. I will be back on Friday at 9:30 a.m., give you an update about the schedule for the next week or so. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day today.